Hi everyone. Today we're going to be going over nutrition and exercise for children with type 1 diabetes. Throughout the presentation, terms such as type 1 diabetes, T1D, or simply diabetes will be used interchangeably. These are the objectives for this session, which I will let you view on your own if desired. And this is what we're going to be discussing today. So we'll start with why diet and exercise is important, specifically in the context of T1D management. We will then talk about how to approach nutrition and exercise with children, since that will set them up for success in the future. And then lastly, we will discuss some specific tips for improving diet and exercise habits or routines. So let's start with the importance of diet and nutrition for diabetes management. So many exercise and dietary habits can affect blood glucose control. Maintaining a balanced diet and exercise routine can improve health markers often looked at in people with type 1 diabetes, including A1C, blood pressure, and cholesterol, which in turn will help to avoid some of those long-term complications such as heart disease, increased risk of stroke, certain cancers, nerve damage, and foot or leg amputation. Lastly, a well-balanced diet and regular physical activity can help to maintain a healthy weight, which research has shown for type 1 diabetics can keep blood glucose levels under better control and require less insulin to do so. So let's transition into how to talk to your kids about food and exercise. It's really crucial that parents approach these topics in the right way because how you do so can really shape your child's relationship with food, exercise, and their body as adults. The importance of this is highlighted by the fact that research shows being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes puts you at an increased risk of developing an eating disorder. 10% of children and adolescents with T1D in the United States have been diagnosed with an eating disorder, primarily anorexia, which is the act of purposely withholding yourself from food, or bulimia, which is the act of purging or forcefully expelling your food after eating it. An additional 15 to 38% of this population with T1D will develop eating disorder tendencies, which for diabetics can also include what is referred to as diabulimia, or the act of purposefully administering less insulin or not administering any insulin at all after eating a meal in order to avoid gaining weight. So again, really important that we emphasize good habits that lend themselves to children successfully developing a healthy relationship with food, exercise, and their bodies. When it comes to discussing food, these are some tips that you can follow to try to establish a healthy relationship between your child and food. The first one here is to use neutral language. What that means is rather than attaching labels like good, bad, healthy, or unhealthy, we would want to instead focus on the food in relation to our senses, meaning how does it taste, look like, smell like, or feel. Introducing the concept of nutrition and the idea that food gives us energy and nutrients is a powerful way to help children learn about healthy lifestyles and the role of food in these. For example, explaining how oranges and peppers provide vitamin C, which can help our body fight off bugs that can make us sick. And even if your child doesn't necessarily understand it entirely while they're young, over time they'll become aware of how food supports our body to function and plays a role in our health and well-being. This is particularly useful when introducing new foods, which you want to do slowly. Research suggests that it can take up to 20 exposures to a new food before a child is even willing to taste it. So practicing patience when you're introducing a new food, especially if it's something like a vegetable or any food that you know is not a preferred one for your child, is going to ultimately be the most beneficial in the long term. Next, you want to encourage moderation. We've all heard the saying, too much of anything is a bad thing. For example, you might explain how foods like fruit and vegetables are included in our diets more often to keep us healthy and energized, while foods like sweets and cakes we include less often for taste preferences or fun. The next item on here is focus on the joy of eating. Encouraging children to savor their food and pay attention to how it makes them feel, or teaching them about the role of food in celebrations, cultural events, and religious festivals, especially those that occur in your own family, can help them to see how food is to be enjoyed. Lastly, use personal context to explain their food. When explaining the role of food in our lives, it's helpful to use examples that are relevant to your child's interests and hobbies. This can be helpful since it shows that eating is a positive thing for us to do to support our lifestyles. So, for example, if your child plays soccer, explain to them how the chicken on their plate has protein that will help their muscles grow. or the vegetables on their plate have vitamins and minerals that will give them energy. Research has shown that children as young as 5 years old can start to become body conscious and aware of what is considered to be a socially acceptable body. Therefore, it's really important that parents approach the subject of exercise carefully with their child. You want to provide counter messaging to combat the harmful notions about fitness and body image that kids may absorb from advertising, pop culture, or even their peers. Parents can encourage physical activity as part of a healthy lifestyle rather than a means to achieving a certain weight or body size. This leads into the next point of talking about exercise in a positive way. When parents make it clear that they see exercise as a chore or a negative experience, that view may rub off on their children. Instead, make an effort to talk about movement in a positive way and highlight how it makes you feel good physically and mentally, because even small negative comments can have a lasting impact on a child. Similarly, we want to avoid using exercise in the context of shame or punishment. We've probably all felt this way at some point before, where we say something along the lines of, "Oh, I ate terribly yesterday, so I've got to work out even harder today." Or you've said to yourself, "Look at how much weight I've gained from sitting around on my computer these past 3 months." Parents should not criticize their children, particularly in front of siblings and peers, if they are not successful with a particular physical activity. Rather, parents should help children find forms of activity they enjoy and feel successful with, and then reinforce participation in those activities. Lastly, parents should try their best to model an active lifestyle themselves. Children are much more likely to follow or mimic behavior than they are instructions. So if you are physically active regularly and with enjoyment, they will consider it part of a healthy life and be more likely to do it as well, especially if we are able to include them in our activities. The last thing we'll talk about today are some general tips for improving diet and nutrition habits and routines for your child. These are just some general dietary recommendations provided by the American Diabetes Association for people with type 1 diabetes. Keep in mind the specific dietary needs of your child may be different based on advice given by a dietitian or their endocrinologist. When looking at carbohydrates, we primarily want these to come from sources such as fruits, vegetables, whole grains, which includes things like quinoa, brown rice, or farro, legumes, which includes things like peas, lentils, or beans, and low-fat dairy products. With fats, there are many different types of fats, some good for you and some bad. But the ones we want to try to limit are saturated fats, which can be found in non-lean meats and dairy products, and we want to completely avoid trans fats. 25 to 30 grams of fiber is the daily recommended amount, which many of the foods you get your carbohydrates from, such as legumes, fruits, and whole grains, contain fiber naturally in them. The daily recommended intake of sodium or salt is less than 2,300 milligrams per day. And while 2,300 milligrams might sound like a lot, that is actually equivalent to only a tablespoon daily. Sugar should be consumed in moderation, and liquids should primarily be water and limited sweetened and artificially sweetened beverages. If you have a child that does not enjoy drinking water, there are many ways to add flavor to it, such as adding citrus fruits and herbs, or by adding natural or sugar-free drink mixes or enhancers. Lastly, a free food is any food item that is less than 20 calories and 5 grams of carbohydrates. These foods are considered to not be impactful enough on blood glucose levels to affect them in any way and can be eaten as frequently as desired. This list includes things like celery, cucumber, and sugar-free gum. The amount of physical activity children need depends on their age. Children 3 to 5 years old need regular physical activity throughout the day to encourage growth and development. This can often be achieved through active play, which includes activities such as hide and seek, hula hooping, obstacle courses, hopscotch, or any games that involve the use of balls. Children and adolescents aged 6 to 17 years need 60 minutes or more of moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity each day. Most of the daily 60 minutes should include activities such as walking, running, or anything that makes their heart beat faster. Bone and muscle strengthening exercises includes activities like climbing, doing push-ups, or jumping. Throughout childhood, though, it's important to keep the activities age appropriate for your child. Younger children usually strengthen their muscles when they do things like play on a jungle gym or climb trees and don't usually need formal muscle strengthening programs. However, as children grow older and become adolescents, they may start needing more structured aerobic and weightlifting programs. These are just some sources of foods that we eat every day. So for carbohydrates, again, can come from food items such as rice, potatoes, and wheats. And those are going to be good as the primary fuel source for your body. Fats come from food items such as fish, olive oil, and nuts. And those are going to be used for energy reserve as well as organ protection. Vitamins can be found in many different fruits and vegetables, and those are going to serve functions such as regulating hormones, providing immunity, and helping your bones grow stronger. Lastly, proteins, which can be found in items such as milk, eggs, meat, fish, and soybeans, are essential to many internal processes in the body, such as the creation of new cells, muscle growth and recovery, and helping our skin, hair, and nails grow. This is the My Plate template created by the US Department of Agriculture. It's a visual reminder to make healthy choices from each of the 5 groups for every meal throughout the day. I do want to note that there is conflicting research on the necessity of the dairy group on this template. So for our purposes, I want us to primarily focus on the actual plate itself. As you can see, over half of the plate consists of fruits and vegetables, with another 25% of the plate coming from whole grains and protein each. This is not a one-size-fits-all template, but again, assuming that there are no other major dietary restrictions in place, this could be a useful tool in helping to develop an idea of what a balanced meal should look like. So now we'll go ahead and transition into some habit and routine recommendations concerning diet. The first one listed on here is meal prepping. Meal prepping at the start of the week can be a great way to ensure that portioned out, balanced meals are readily available throughout the week. This can look like making the entire meal itself and storing it for later consumption, or prepping your ingredients such as weighing out your proteins or dicing vegetables that you plan on using for a dish later in the week. One of the added benefits is that while it is a considerable time commitment when doing it, it might save you a lot of time throughout the week, especially when you are running around with work, school, and other extracurricular activities. Involve your kids in the cooking process. I want to emphasize that you should keep it age appropriate and consider your child's individual skill levels, but research shows that children are more likely to eat and enjoy food that they had a hand in making. So any way that you can get your child in the kitchen with you is going to be a great tool. Providing accurate carb counts is important when it comes to the relationship between diet and insulin delivery. It's easy to get in the habit of rounding up carb entries for individual foods to make the math easier for ourselves. But even if you have to break out a calculator, providing exact carb counts ensure the most accurate amount of insulin needed and will be beneficial in keeping blood glucose levels under better control. Maintaining a regular eating schedule to the best of your ability can also be beneficial when it comes to things like basal rates and carb ratios, since you can eat based on what the rest of the day looks like as far as physical activity, extracurricular activities, how long until the next opportunity to eat will come, and so on. You might also want to consider maintaining some sort of log, whether on paper or through an app on your phone, of glycemic index and load. If you're unfamiliar with these terms, glycemic index is a way of ranking carbohydrate-containing foods based on how slowly or quickly they are digested and increase blood glucose levels over a period of time, usually about 2 hours. Glycemic load is the amount of carbohydrate-containing food you eat that affects your blood glucose levels. So for example, if you eat a pasta with a low glycemic index, a large serving can still cause the blood glucose levels to rise more rapidly than a suggested serving, in the same way that a smaller portion of a pasta with a higher glycemic index would do the same thing. Often, these foods that affect the body more than others looks different for every diabetic, so maintaining some sort of log can help you make more informed decisions about insulin delivery if you eat one of the foods on this log. Lastly, do not restrict or eliminate any food. This goes back to the previous idea of everything in moderation. We want to encourage moderation and we want to encourage balance, avoiding the use of terms like good or bad when describing the nutritional value of a food. When it comes to exercise, it's best to make it a family event. This can include family walks in the evening after dinner, spending time together at a park, or as the next point suggests, doing social outings at places that promote or involve increased activity like bowling or swimming. Decreasing screen time is a good idea for really everybody, but especially children when trying to get them to be more physically active. However, it is best to have an activity planned and ready to go if you are going to limit their screen time rather than decreasing that time and leaving them to their own devices to entertain themselves. Try to have a variety of types of physical activity for your child to participate in. Too much of any one particular form of physical activity can become boring and unmotivating for your child to want to be a part of. So finding new ways or new opportunities to have your child be physically active could avoid some of those barriers. Keeping blood glucose levels even throughout exercise can involve a lot of trial and error, and not every method works for every individual or even for every period of physical activity. However, some recommendations that research has shown to be effective in general include eating carbs before, during, or immediately following exercise to not only maintain energy levels, but also keep from experiencing a low blood glucose rating. Additionally, maintaining regular blood glucose checks during exercise, whether that's manually or with the use of a continuous glucose monitor, can allow you to make real-time or even advanced decisions on what the course of action should be to avoid out-of-range glucose readings while exercising. These are the references used for this presentation, and thank you so much for watching.